Okay guys, Alex Forrest vlogging to you on a sunny Sunday morning. It's quite chilly here in Warsaw. Now, you may be wondering how on earth I can compare and contrast the coronavirus pandemic with approaching girls and dating girls. But stay tuned for the end of this vlog, because I sincerely tell you, the sort of mental application that you need to make about situations like this of fear and paranoia, in my view, are very similar to the sort of mental approach that you have to take in order to be successful in the arena of women and dating. So stay tuned. Yesterday I basically thought that I ought to, for the sake of my business, as people were, starting to ask questions, starting to take time off work at the law firm this is, I thought, I probably ought to take this seriously. And I decided, not to be a, radical libertarian right winger, but actually to see whether or not eyeball this coronavirus situation and just to see whether or not the fears were grounded, and to try and keep an open mind about whether or not they were. I'm a lawyer, and it occurred to me that actually I spend much of my adult life advising people on, for example, the merits of their cases. It's quite a good training for drilling into the real facts behind the situation. And in fact, if you don't do it, it can be extremely expensive as a law firm if you, for example, misread a dud case. So in short, I'm not a medical expert, but I am someone who has spent 25 years analysing facts and drawing conclusions successfully. I hasten to add, just to blow my own trumpet. I also think you have to take what medical experts say with a slight pinch of salt. I was at a trial, I was running a trial. I wasn't actually there in person, but my solicitor who I sent reported back to me, where a barrister was cross-examining our client about whether or not a lady who died and basically left a will was a narcissist or not. Was a narcissist, and she was the sort of opponent, sort of person, this lady, who puts her own photograph on her letterhead. The barrister was cross-examining my client, and he said, Mr. X, how can you describe this lady as a narcissist? Isn't that a bit extreme? You're not medically qualified, are you? What credentials do you have to form an opinion? And he replied, bright as a button, well, if it walks like a duck, if it porks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And everybody erupted in laughter in the courtroom. I think even the judge broke into a wry smile, and the barrister very quickly retreated, and in fact he brought his cross-examination of my client to an early close because he wasn't getting the answers he wanted. And that is true, guys. You are a walking, talking, rational, reasoning human being, and this is the key, going to be the key takeaway from today, is you need to apply your intelligence to situations. It doesn't require some magical academic level intelligence. I'm talking about common sense. I'm talking about reason. And I'm talking about work. Yes, you've got not to be mentally lazy, but make a mental effort. So now I'm going to just touch on a little bit about this coronavirus pandemic. So look, I sat down, I discovered some articles, New York Times, Daily Telegraph, looked at the World Health Organization statistics, I looked at the National Institute for Allergies and Diseases. I looked at the stats, spent 2 or 3 hours just drilling into it all. And it was really fascinating. I actually had felt a little bit of a fear infection myself over the past few days, walking around the streets of Warsaw. A lonely old sod. There's absolutely nobody about, and all the coffee shops and all the bars are closed. So I drilled into the facts, yeah? And I just encourage you, if nothing else from this video, whichever side you fall on the argument, that you simply, exercise, you simply engage your brain with these sorts of situations. The first thing to say is I discovered that, in fact, periodically there are very serious flu viruses that go around. In fact, globally, annually, up to 650,000 people, when it gets bad, down to 200,000-300,000, die of the flu every year. So the first thing I try to do, which is what you're trained to do as a good lawyer, is to look at the big picture and set things in context before drilling into the detail. I also discovered a stat from the Clinical Diseases Clinic, a body in America, that occasionally every few years there's a serious seasonal flu, and in the year 2017 to 2018 there was a flu in the United States that carried off 61,000 people, according to the statistics. You've got to be careful of statistics, but that's a big part of the problem here, that people are not getting a grip on the statistics. Now, I also looked at, the big picture in terms of other killer diseases, and just to take one random example, measles is actually on the rise, would you believe? In fact, in the UK, in the last year or two, there have been annually about 1,000 cases of measles. This is a disease that hits 5-year-olds and younger, that causes brain damage, blindness and deafness. I mean, it's a particularly serious disease. You kind of wouldn't want to be alive after that. In Bangladesh, for example, I've got a buddy who's Bangladeshi. There's been 1 or perhaps 2 people die from the coronavirus in Bangladesh so far. Annually, 20,000 children in Bangladesh die from the measles, and it just kind of makes you wonder. So now let's have a look at the actual death rate for the coronavirus. This is global figures. As of today, it's around about 13,000 deaths. Now that's for a 2-month period. They've been keeping statistics on that ever since it broke out in China in January. So extrapolate that up over 12 months, and that gives you what? 6 times 13, that's 72,000, 78,000. So, that's during January, February, March. That's, the coldest, most wintry time of the year in China and in Europe. So perhaps even that's perhaps high, but let's say 50,000 people from what is, admittedly, let's be reasonable about it, a serious flu virus that does obviously need proportionate response. It doesn't need a response, but the response needs to be proportionate. Yeah. Now, okay, I hear the doom mongers, the virus Armageddon armchair dudes cry out, well, yes, but look at the exponential growth of this, each day. And if you like to carry around a little app, or you can look up the death stats like a league table, you think, oh no, another 500 illnesses, another 50 deaths, and so on and so forth. And but you've only got 2 months of statistics. You can't really assess this at all until after probably 6 months or after a year. But look at China. Yeah, Europe is like a replication of China. Happens in China, now it's spreading, and now it's happening in Europe, and then it's going into America. In China, look at these 2 charts. Sure, you have some exponential growth, but China is now in clear regression. Both these 2 charts indicate that in terms of deaths and people who are catching the disease daily. And arguably, China has been in a bit of a basket case. They went in total police state of silence initially, and they completely ignored the problem until the controversy with the Chinese doctor who died blew up. And then only then did they actually get a handle and a lockdown on the situation, well after the virus had spread. So anyway, look, perhaps I'm not being fair on some of the the key claims, the key serious issues that certainly large sections of the press seem to like to major on. So let me now just deal with 3 those three key claims. Now, the first one is, if you like to read these types of newspapers, the ones that like to splash over their headlines that it is a killer, that it is 10 times, and what a great number, 10 times more fatal than your average flu. Yeah, well, that does actually, seem reasonably serious when you look at it, doesn't it? The figure of 10 times more serious. And I'm leaving aside the overall context, the way I've just set the scene earlier in the first part of this vlog. So what do we have to say about this? Well, I think the first thing we have to say is that you can't be clear about these figures. Nobody really has an idea. You've got the first 2 months of a pandemic. That's all the statistics you've got. And what's interesting is the World Health Organization itself said quite recently that the fatality rate was 3.4%. Yeah, so of those who catch it, 3.4% die. Normal flu is like 0.1%, incidentally. They're saying that this kills 1%, which is 10 times 0.1, yeah, 10 times more serious than the normal flu. Now, that was then varied down to 1%. And actually, if you sort of drill into the detail, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of work. As I say, I just went online and read what I consider to be reasonably reputable articles from reputable newspapers online. If you actually drill into the detail, the National Institute for Diseases and Allergies actually has gone on record as saying ultimately the statistics for the fatality rates of this flu could turn out to be no worse than a serious flu virus, than simply a kind of a serious flu virus. And you just don't know. But clearly it's like a movable feast of statistics here. If you look at the case of the cruise liner, which is quite an interesting standalone kind of laboratory for the statisticians out there case study, because that was the virus spread through a ship full of 3,700 people, and it was obviously put into a state of quarantine. People had been on that ship for weeks, incidentally. 20% of those 3,700 got it. Of those 700 who got it, 1% of them died. So there's your, kind of your 1% figure, and one can't help but think that the press have liked to extrapolate that out of the Diamond Princess case study. What's interesting about that is you've got people crammed into a metal box in total isolation with the disease, that's free to travel from cabin to cabin, from packed dining rooms, from everybody eating together at breakfast, from everybody going to the same entertainments and events in the evening. Absolutely perfect putrid dish for breeding a flu virus. Plus, you've got a population of cruise liner customers are invariably much older than the average. So you've probably got the absolute worst case scenario you could possibly invent, and as I say, all together for weeks, in the case of the Diamond Princess. So you've got to start to wonder, and you've got to start to drill in to just how serious the statistics are, and whether you can rely on them, or whether the press are just jumping on a sexy story. That's what the press need to do. If you're from the UK, Brexit is now over, and the press pack need to go scavenging after another story. I'll come on to that in a minute. The other thing is, actually, I talked about, for example, the previous flu pandemics in the States, for example. There you've seen flus carry away young people and adults. And what's interesting about this one is that it seems to be carrying away, well, it doesn't seem, the statistics seem particularly reliable. people who are 70 or 80 plus. By far the biggest category is the 80 plus category, and they have underlying medical conditions. So it's as if, you know, they were already, some of them presumably were already dying in the first place. And so that 1% figure has been extrapolated cleverly by somebody who is trying to make a good story and push an agenda to arrive at a headline: this is a killer 10 times worse than a normal flu. All right, so well, let's come on to another serious claim, which has actually troubled me, and I know I've got friends who've got relatives in Italy, and you know the paranoia fear levels in that area are quite high, and perhaps we need to take that seriously. So, like a good lawyer, I sat down and I looked for articles on, you know, what actually really is happening in Italy, because yeah, it does seem pretty serious, doesn't it? The deaths in Italy are even higher than they are in China for a population that's a lot smaller. And I discovered some interesting facts. I discovered, first of all, that Italy has the second oldest population of any country in the world, which is quite interesting. That the region that's been hardest hit is the oldest region in that country with the second oldest population in the world. But it was interesting, it didn't end there. I found a Daily Telegraph article, which is a broadsheet newspaper, respectable-ish, very respectable on scientific matters, I would think, and medical matters, broadsheet newspaper article on this, that actually had quoted the doctor who was a scientific advisor to the Minister of Health in Italy. Yeah. First thing to say is, you know, why is this disparity between China and Italy? This doctor says that in China, the median actually age of people in hospitals in China is 46. The median age of people in hospital in Italy is 67. I mean, that's taking a huge group of people into that older age category with underlying medical conditions who are susceptible to the virus. By far the biggest majority, perhaps by far is an exaggeration, but the clear majority are 70, and actually the biggest percentage are the 80 plus people. It didn't stop there. It also, from what can only be considered to be a reputable source, quoted him as saying that in the Italian hospitals, the way that they're gathering statistics is that they're being really very generous to the coronavirus, because they are categorizing somebody who dies, who's in the 70, 80 plus age range, who's deemed, is the word that's used, to have the coronavirus at the point of death. And don't forget, all of us are carrying flus. A lot of us are carrying the flus, and a lot of the time, as having died from the coronavirus, even where they had what's described as pre-morbidity conditions, i.e. serious other underlying medical conditions, not just one, but many with 2 or 3. And you do wonder whether or not, at least part and parcel of the panic, is the enormous strain that's been generated by the paranoia on the hospital system in Italy. And quite frankly, after a few weeks, can any reasonable, rational conclusions be drawn as to how, as to whether or not Italy, at least, is experiencing something of a health Armageddon? I should also finally add that you have to put these statistics in context too, because let's be honest, Italy is not it's a little bit third world economically these days in certain parts, and in terms of health and hygiene, it hasn't got a particularly good reputation. If you go to Germany, you discover, and look, these statistics are all available for you to look at online, that the fatality rate is 0.3%. yeah, 0.3%, not 1%. I mean, one wonders if you took out Italy, with its peculiar set of circumstances, if you took out China, just how far down that 1% rate went, and took it into the category of a normal, serious flu situation in developed countries. Just a footnote on the Italian statistics there. Having re-evaluated the situation, the National Institute for Health has actually said that 88% of those who died, who deemed to have the coronavirus, had these underlying medical conditions and were in this seriously older age bracket. Now, the third sort of key issue that you might want to address is, and this creates a little bit of knee-jerk paranoia, is that they haven't found a vaccine yet. And while I don't know what else to say about that, except but try telling that to the 61,000 people who died of flu in the United States between 2017 2018. I dare say that clearly they hadn't found an effective vaccine by the time that 61,000 people died. Flu is flu. If it's a serious flu, and you've got these underlying medical conditions, I'm not sure there is a magic bullet vaccine that's going to save everybody. All right, now, I mean, having looked at these and I think I've genuinely tried to keep an open mind as a lawyer about assessing the situation. And as I say, these were just simply the first articles I stumbled on. If I'd stumbled on articles with the opposite point of view, I might be recording a different vlog today. It makes you wonder why then, I'm standing here in Warsaw, the place is in a state of absolute lockdown. And it sort of raises kind of rather interesting social, philosophical type, sociological questions. And thinking about it, it's all about story. Stories are some of the most powerful things in the world. I'm not just talking about, a story that you read as a child by your mum, a fairy story, although those are bloody powerful too. The princess story has basically affected the way women view themselves from having had their mothers read it at bedtime. But I mean, story on a bigger level, the press story that's going around the houses. It's quite interesting if you look at the history of this coronavirus story. You got it broke out in a police state to a point, China, certainly secret propaganda-driven police type state, which decided not, that's probably an exaggeration from my Chinese friends out there, but certainly they did not help themselves by keeping completely quiet for a period of time about this. And then, unfortunately, and this is often the way it works as far as press and stories are concerned, they had an incident. An adult, healthy, not very old, Chinese doctor who had been basically charged and persecuted by the state for propagating what they considered to be lies about the seriousness of the medical situation, died of the very virus that he was talking about, which is like a bit of a perfect storm of situations, particularly when you think how few adults have died from this virus. And that's just a beautiful story for the press junkies. They must have been so relieved in the UK press, which are the gutter press of the world, I have to say. They must have been so relieved once Brexit was done and dusted after the general election to be able to latch on to a fresh story. And then, of course, they could only build on the story from there. They got some great statistics that they cobbled together, even though it's very early days. When the press makes an announcement about something very, very quickly, they're just looking for a story. They're not being scientific or reasonable. Yeah, they want to create passions. They want to stir feelings and emotions. They want to get people glued to the news on their phones and on their computers, and they want people to be buying newspapers at the store and putting garish photographs of people on face masks in order to put everyone into a state of paranoia, because presumably the press are doing quite well on the stock exchange at the moment. So it has become this, a great story, and then they managed to find a statistic 10 times more fatal, and they love to use the word, they like to describe the coronavirus. Sometimes I feel sorry for the coronavirus. God, it got such a bad press. It's like a total killer. It's the Terminator. And you see how that makes a great story. So really, I think the real villains behind this whole thing is not necessarily the pandemic, it's the press and what they are disseminating. The virus that they are spreading is a mental virus that's affecting people's abilities to function. And look, let's just have a look, because all the panic laws that the various countries of Europe and the rest of the world have been enacting, no one really knows how serious those steps, the drastic steps that have been taken, are, and what impact, of course, they're having or going to have economically. The government, in taking these very drastic, I think steps need to be taken, but they need to be proportionate. I don't know what mine that they're laying for the future, but I think there's a danger, and I think it's significant, or certainly a real danger, that they're laying an economic mine. I mean, I have a close family member who runs a pizza van, and his diary, as we approach the wedding season and the event season in the spring and summer, has just become basically emptied. I have a squash teacher. All the clubs are closed. He's got no business. His wife is a doctor. She's been turning away hundreds of people and telling them to go home because it's just been overloading the surgery. I've not actually met anybody who's got the coronavirus. I know symptoms don't immediately manifest themselves. It takes a few days, but I've not met anybody. I've not had anyone tell me they've had the coronavirus. I've not actually, heard from anybody about anybody who's died from the coronavirus. But I certainly have, from my experience, heard these stories about the economic situation. The only place I've been able to get a coffee in Warsaw is a French cafe called Vincent. The manager there this morning told me that she's got, normally there would be 12 staff there, that one shop. They're part-time staff. They are sitting at home. Lots of them are students. They are hard up, and they have not got any money. And if this goes on, maybe it will work. Maybe the drastic steps will work. But if this goes on, you do start to see some serious economic hardship, and perhaps on a global economic level, because what you're looking at is now, yes, they have now turned on the money printing machines. Quantitative easing 0.4 in North America, now in Britain, in Europe. They're throwing money around like confetti because they're all politicians, unfortunately, and the press is basically the tail that's wagging the dog insofar as the political landscape is concerned. In Warsaw, the government have elections in May, so they don't want to be seen to not being, safe and serious. I just cannot help but think that for anybody who's interested in the economics of it, I won't go into it now, but the 2008 recession, and a lasterplaster was applied by money printing, and they said we were only going to have a bit of it, and now this could be a little bit of a straw that breaks the camel's back economically. And certainly as a business and a law firm, I'm taking this side of things very seriously, because we could be in danger of going into quite a deep depression. So that sounds all quite gloomy, but you're probably saying, Mr. Forrest, what are you doing? talk to us about women and dating. Well, I think what's the point of this is not that you buy into what I'm saying, yeah, not that you accept off the bat what I'm saying, and you may be on the opposite camp. I don't know where you come from. What I'm saying is that as a man, you have the capacity to reason rationally about things. And I think what I've noticed about the guys who are successful at women and dating is that they reflect, that they imply their intelligence to the situation, and they basically learn, and they don't get carried away by irrational fears, paranoias, and insubstantiated will-o'-the-wisp kind of goblins and gremlins, yeah, because I think that's probably what's happening. Most importantly, you are not going to get good at anything, let alone being good with women, unless you put in the mental effort, yeah, not just the courage or the balls to go out and say hello to girls during the daytime or in the evening, but actually you put in the mental effort to reflect on what you're doing in order to learn from your mistakes, and that's basically a process of reasoning. I've been giving some Skype calls recently to guys and for women and dating issues, pretty sort of straightforward issues. I have one guy who thought that he wasn't very good at opening up conversations with girls. We sat down, I looked at his texts, and he was getting a lot of positive responses from girls whose telephone numbers he'd got, and he got it completely the wrong way round. He'd actually not been seeing the problem, which was that he hadn't really been properly following up with his text messaging after he'd got the numbers from girls. I've got one guy who was in a state of anxiety, real anxiety about the sense of rejection, because he felt that he was intimidated and wasn't successful with particularly attractive girls, and at the time I thought it was quite a serious problem, and then I got into conversation with him during the Skype call, and then I discovered he had I had a relationship with that actually really attractive girl. Oh, really? I said, so you've actually, one of these attractive girls that you feel you can't get, you've actually had a relationship with one already? He said, yeah, but it wasn't for very long. I said, yeah, but you told me the problem was actually not, being able to approach girls. You had a sexual relationship with her? Yeah, he said. I started to say, actually, you've been quite arrogant about this. You have actually been quite successful. It's just that you kind of want more. You want, any respectable guy would be delighted at the sort of the results that you've been having. And it was just this process of discussion, reflection and analysis that helped to unlock the problem for these guys who went away thinking, oh yeah. I had another chap who was just sort of thought he couldn't have a conversation with the girl after he'd paid her a compliment and got a conversation going. He then didn't know how to proceed from there, and his sort of paranoia was, I'm no good at teasing, having a flirtatious conversation with a girl. When we looked at it, all he needed was to find a line such as "what I noticed about you was," to bridge the gap from the opener to having a flirtatious, genuine conversation, in-depth conversation with the girl. Just a little thing, but he hadn't seen it. Now, I think two of the most successful guys at this stuff that I know, in terms of this current flu pandemic, are really quite chilled and relaxed about it. They're like, what? Is the world gone completely mad? And both these guys are special and distinctive for the fact that they reflect, they analyse, they have mental rigor, And I see this all too often, guys in the area of women and dating kind of flaking out of it. Not because they've not got balls. You've got balls. If you approach a girl cold and pay her a compliment and open up a conversation, you have got a big pair of gonads, my friend. And all power to you, credit to you. But what happens is, then down the track, they're a bit intellectually lazy, or perhaps jaded or disillusioned about something. The cure for that, the tonic, the antidote for that is, for that little mental virus, is reason, is intellectual analysis. Not academic, just a bit like I did yesterday afternoon, just taking 2 or 3 hours out of your week to just, write up some notes and analyse the situation, and to check the truthfulness of the voices and the fears and the paranoias that are running in your head. So look, there it is, quite a sort of a big high-level type vlog, but I just think that this ability to sit down and to reflect and to be intellectually hard working and disciplined is such an important thing for a dude to practice. You will, after I had drilled into this, because I was a bit worried that maybe what's been going on has got real substance and we're in for some sort of health Armageddon. And I noticed I've been carrying it around for a few days. It is this mental virus that infects people in the office. Everyone talks about it in an ill-informed way, and everyone takes aggressive positions in respect of it based on their backgrounds and and so on, and their characters and so on and so forth. I just physically felt the clouds of mental anxiety clear after I had done a little bit of work on just, applying your noodle to the situation and just kind of figuring things out. So, time to plug, because obviously now is a time of perfect time when the streets are completely deserted. Does anybody walk past whilst I've been recording this vlog? Now's the perfect time when the streets are deserted, and probably deserted in every town from west coast of America to to Bangkok, to reflect, to read, to listen to good quality material online in the area of women and dating. So basically buy my books, you bastards. Don't be strapping on your balls this week, the next couple of weeks. Just be doing some reading. And actually, in all seriousness, reading is a very good tonic. Particularly hard, an actual physical book, and preferably not in a topic of your choosing. Doesn't have to be women and dating, but that process does help you to reflect and to be intellectually rigorous about the opinions you hold about the world. Let's be honest, if you are into the world of women dating, daytime approach, as I now like to call it, you're not going with the social winds. You're not being blown by the storms of public opinion, by social conditioning. So don't let yourself be blown around like a leaf in the breeze by the fear and paranoia that's currently gripping the planet. There it is. That's all for today, folks. Stay tuned. Bye for now.